Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and Senator Johnson for working on a bipartisan basis to put together this legislation. I'm a co-sponsor of it. I know the House has a different view in terms of I'd like to approach it, but we got to get this one done. I mean, we just heard about the importance of it. So I thank you for both of you for working on this issue. And it's less than a month when it expires, so we've got to move quickly. I spoke in my opening statement about the appreciation we have for the men and women who you represent. We just learned from media accounts that 5 Customs and Border Protection agents were shot, 1 fatally during a vessel interdiction against suspected drug smugglers off the coast of Puerto Rico. This just happened, and our thoughts and prayers, of course, are with the family of the agent who was fatally shot and also with those agents who were wounded. But I think it's a sober reminder of the sacrifices that the individuals who you represent today here make every day, and we owe them our support. It's a dangerous time, and this is an unfortunate example of that. So with regard to the southern border, we've talked a lot about this over the months and years even. You know, how do you take a broken system and fix it? Because clearly, if you look at this chart behind me, it's broken. We have had all kinds of charts in this committee and all kinds of discussions about it. There was an interesting back and forth recently between President Biden's Chief of Border Patrol, Raul Ortiz, who works for you, as you know, Mr. Secretary, and the state of Florida. The Attorney General in Florida has a lawsuit against the department with regard to the southern border. And I just thought I'd go over that quickly. This has been the worst year of apprehensions ever, the last fiscal year. But the second worst year was last year. And so these numbers speak for themselves. More than 2 million people apprehended between the ports of entry in 2022. This summer, when the Chief of Border Patrol was questioned by the state of Florida, he gave his answers under oath. And I would ask unanimous consent to place the transcript of the Border Patrol Chief's testimony into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Secretary, I'm going to ask you the same questions that the Chief of Border Patrol was asked to see if you agree with him. And if you could, please just give me a yes or no answer as he did. The first question, is the southern border currently in crisis, yes or no?
Ranking Member Portman, the entire hemisphere is suffering a migration crisis. We are seeing an unprecedented movement of people from country to country. It is not restricted to the southern border. We are seeing an unprecedented movement of people throughout the Western Hemisphere. And I think the case of Venezuela is the most compelling example. Yeah. With a population of between 25 and 28 million people, approximately 8 million of them have left that country. Yeah. Colombia is hosting 2.4 million Venezuelans.
I would ask you for a yes or an answer with regard to the southern border. I've been in Colombia twice in the last year. Very aware of what's going on with regard to the displaced people out of Venezuela, and for that matter, Nicaragua, Cuba. But the question is all the more pressing. So what are we doing about it? Shouldn't we be changing our policies at the border to deal with it instead of having this resolved? So my question to you again, is the southern border currently in crisis, yes or no?
We are seeing a significant challenge at the southern border as we are seeing it throughout the hemisphere.
Chief Ortiz stated yes. So you know, your Border Patrol Chief, he said the obvious, which is yes. Second question, would you agree that the unprecedented number of unlawful migrants are entering that an unprecedented number of unlawful migrants are entering the United States right now? Yes or no?
Ranking Member Portman, I believe that the number of encounters that we have had at the border, I think it is approximately 2.3 million this past year, is the highest on record.
Okay, so the answer is yes by Chief Ortiz, and sounds like you agree with him on that. Mr. Secretary, when President Biden took office, is it true that the number of migrants trying to unlawfully enter the United States has increased substantially? Yes or no?
It has, and there are many different factors that that contribute to that.
Okay. Well, I asked you these questions. Obviously, his answer was yes. He was candid and he gave short answers. We can't fix the problem unless we acknowledge it. We can't fix the problem unless we understand the facts.
Yes.
We can't fix the problem unless we're willing to be honest, Republicans, Democrats, everyone alike, saying we've got a crisis. And if we don't fix this crisis at the border, we'll continue to see these same results.
Ranking Member Portman, if I may, there's been a problem with our immigration system, an acknowledged one, unanimously so, for years and years. The system is
Well, for years and years, but again, look at this chart. This is the numbers. So it's gotten far worse. And look, we don't have time to go into the details as to how we fix it, but you and I have talked about this a lot, Mr. Secretary. And if the asylum system is not fixed, this won't end. If we don't give the Border Patrol more resources, this is not going to end. If we don't figure out a way to provide for deportations when people are here illegally, particularly when they're committing other crimes, this will continue. So we are, unfortunately, looking at a situation where, you mentioned Colombia, if you go to the countries throughout the hemisphere, they believe this is a pull factor, our policies. And the leadership of these countries actually don't want their people moving into the United States. It might seem counterintuitive to some people, but some of their best and brightest are leaving because of our pull factor, because we're not putting in place the right policies to be able to control our own southern border. So many other questions, and we'll get a chance the second round, I hope, to talk about some of these. With regard to the cyber attacks we talked about earlier, the agencies that have been compromised in some of these attacks concern us greatly. Yesterday, CISA and the FBI issued a joint advisory detailing suspected Iranian government-sponsored actors' compromise of the federal agencies using this Log4 shell vulnerability. I'd ask unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to include that advisory in the record, so we have it as part of this record. We have discussed this vulnerability at length in this committee. Another example of the issues. My time is expiring here in a second, but can you just tell us, Secretary Mayorkas, what agencies or agency was compromised with regard to this latest announcement you made regarding the Iranian government-sponsored attack?
Ranking Member Portman, that identity has not been disclosed, and I'd need to speak with my colleagues to determine whether I would be compromising any security interest in doing so.
Are you confident that the actors have been expelled from our federal networks?
I will once again need to confer with my colleagues to determine the status of the effort by the bad actors.
We are considering, as you know, this FISMA reauthorization. This is the Federal Information Security Modernization Act to trigger cyber incident reporting to Congress. Would this be considered a major incident?
I believe so, Ranking Member Portman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Portman. Senator Carper, you're recognized for your 7 minutes of questions.
7. Okay. To each of our witnesses, welcome. It's great to see you all again. Some of you I've known for a while and pretty well, and even though your families. And I just want to say, but just to begin with, we don't do these jobs by ourselves, whether you're on that side of the table or this side of the table. Our families put up with a lot, and we just want to thank your families for sharing you with us, especially as Thanksgiving approaches. First Secretary of Homeland Security was a guy named Tom Ridge from Pennsylvania, from Erie, Pennsylvania. We were both Vietnam veterans. And we were congressmen together, same freshman class. We were governors together for a number of years. He remains a very close friend. And I think back, I joined this committee, I was elected in, oh Lord, I want to say, 22 years ago. And Joe Lieberman said, when I tried to decide what committees to be on, he said, you should try to get on the Governmental Affairs Committee. And I said, well, I'm interested in that. He said, it's just a perfect fit for you, former governor, former state treasurer, care about things working well. And he said, you should join the, and I did. And 2 years later, 9/11 came along, and we ended up, the whole world changed. Our whole world changed. And the nature of the threats that we faced the day that Tom Ridge was sworn into office to be our secretary, and what we face today is unbelievable. It's just incredible how the world has changed in not so good ways. And I just want to say special thanks to each of you and the folks you work with to help us try to address and be ready for the threats that are coming our way almost every day. I'll start with Secretary Mayorkas, and in the second round of questions, if I'm lucky, I'll ask questions of our other 2 witnesses. But Mr. Secretary, again, my first question is to you. I know your job is not an easy one. Between leading a workforce of almost 250,000 people, whose duties range anywhere from aviation to border security, enhancing our nation's cyber posture, responding to natural disasters, protecting our homeland, I hope that everyone here today can respect that, and that your dedication and service to our nation is commendable. That goes for all three of our witnesses here today, and I thank you again for your service. As we continue to see a number of encounters at our southern border, the Department of Homeland Security has been leading a whole-of-government response to address these challenges and to help keep our borders more secure. And Mr. Secretary, can you just talk about some of the changes in migration patterns that we've seen at our southern border in the last year and a half, and what policies the department has put in place to address these challenges? Specifically, can you speak to the investments in border technology and legal migration pathways in your level rather of engagement with other countries in the region, given that the migration patterns have been a hemispheric challenge? Please.
Senator Carper, thank you for acknowledging the challenge that these positions present. Of course, the challenge is all relative. Ranking Member Portman mentioned the tragic loss of one of our frontline personnel. Several other were gravely wounded. I was briefed on the situation very early this morning. These are brave members of our air and marine operations within U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So the difficulty of this job cannot be compared to the difficulty that our frontline personnel face every day, and their bravery and selfless service should be recognized. And I appreciate Ranking Member Portman acknowledging that. The migration patterns in the hemisphere have changed dramatically. When I was the Deputy Secretary, we were very concerned about migration from the Central American countries of El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. We have encountered now the highest level of encounters by Venezuelans, Cubans, and Nicaraguans. And that demographic, that changed demographic, makes the challenge even more acute because our diplomatic relations with these countries is obviously quite strained, and we're unable to remove as easily individuals from these countries of origin. Of course, we implemented thus far at an early stage a very successful response to the Venezuelan migration in particular. We have 6 lines of effort, Senator Carper. We have surged resources to the southern border: personnel, technology, facilities, transportation capabilities. We have increased our processing efficiency. We're increasingly digitizing our processes, modernizing them so that the intake process and the screening and vetting process is enhanced and more efficient. We are delivering consequences for unlawful entry. We have increased the level of prosecution of illegal entry when individuals seek to evade law enforcement. We have sought to bolster the capacity of non-governmental organizations and state and local jurisdictions. We are conducting an unprecedented disruption campaign against the smuggling organizations and the transnational criminal organizations. And we are also working very closely with our partners to the south to deter irregular migration. The declaration that was signed in the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles several months ago speaks powerfully of that. We need countries throughout the hemisphere to enforce their laws of humanitarian relief as well as their laws of enforcement. And so this is a multi-pronged effort to address a multinational challenge throughout the hemisphere.
Thank you for that response. Most of us are people of faith, and there's a verse of scripture in Matthew 25 that I think a lot of us are familiar with about the least of these. When I was hungry, did you feed me? When I was thirsty, did you give me to drink? When I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was sick and in prison, did you visit me? When I was a stranger in your land, did you welcome me? When I was a stranger in your land, did you welcome me? The last one's hard. In fact, they're all pretty difficult, but the last one is especially hard. We in an effort to try to reduce the likelihood that people are going to risk life and limb to come to this country and relocate here, we leave, in some cases, the hellacious conditions in which they live. They come many miles, hundreds of miles sometimes, to reach our borders. And some of us think that, why don't we give them the opportunity, if they want to come here, to actually go to our embassies or our consulates and let those intentions be known and to work from there. Would you respond to that idea, please, just briefly?
Senator Carper, our laws are laws of humanitarian relief and laws of accountability. We have an asylum system that is one of the sources of pride of our country, and we enforce the law. When an individual qualifies for humanitarian relief, they are, under the law, entitled to remain here. And if they do not qualify, they are to be removed, and we are enforcing the laws in every respect.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Carper. Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.